Hey sixth graders, welcome to another video. I know it's been a while since I last uploaded a video rather, but you guys have been patient. I appreciate it. This video will cover cells, more specifically plant cells and animal cells, and the organelles that are within those cells, within the plant cells and animal cells, that is. So I hope it's helpful. Here we go. Before we even get into it, though, let's talk about what cells are. And remember, when we watched the Bill Nye video a couple weeks ago, Bill Nye said that cells are tiny compartments of life. And that's because anything that is alive, anything that is living, anything that has life is made up of living cells, meaning cells that are still alive. Certain things like, pink lemonade might require, they're made of lemons, but the lemons that are in lemonade are not alive. They're dead. They're dead cells. They're not living cells, so we cannot say that that lemonade is alive. That would be interesting thought if lemonade and the things that we drink were alive, but that's not the case. Those things are made up of dead cells, so they're not alive. We could say us as humans, we are alive because the cells that make us up are living. Cells that make up most plants that are still growing, those cells are alive. Therefore, those plants are alive because they're made up of cells. So our definition of life always comes back to cells. Whether something is made up of living cells or not, that'll determine whether that organism is alive or not. And that's why I said it's the building block of life. If something is made up of living cells, then technically, then it has life. It is living. And as we have right here, all living things are made up of cells. The two types of cells that we're going to focus on are plant cells and animal cells. There are other types, but we're just going to focus on animal cells and plant cells. And if you look at this picture right off the bat, we notice that plant cells are rectangular. They have a bit of a structure to them, whereas animal cells tend to look like big globs, usually circular. That's not always the case though, but they don't really have a consistent structure, whereas plant cells tend to always have a rectangular shape to them. That'll be important as we move on, but we will keep on rolling through this. So the two different types, cells are broken up into two different types of groups. We have prokaryote cells and eukaryote cells, or prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryote cells are cells that have no nucleus. And I want you to look at, follow my mouse if you can. Notice I have underlined pro and no. That's because, first of all, they both rhyme. Pro and no rhyme. That would be a nice memory cue to help us remember that prokaryote cells have no nucleus, okay? And right over here in this picture, here's an example of a prokaryotic cell. This is actually a bacteria cell, actually several bacteria cells. This is what they look like. It's kind of interesting, I think. But these cells actually, they will not have a nucleus inside them. They will contain DNA, however, but they do not have a nucleus. All right. And on the other hand, eukaryote cells are what you all have, okay? Because the cells that are in you contain a nucleus. They have a nucleus, and what's inside that nucleus, as we know, is chromosomes. Within those chromosomes, DNA, which determine your genetic makeup or certain traits that you have, such as eye color, how tall you are, how fast you are, things like that will be determined by the DNA that's inside your nucleus. But we'll get into that in a little bit. We won't spend too much time on it right now. Actually, it looks like we're going to talk about it in probably about 30 seconds. So bad on me for not thinking straight there. But anyways, now we're going to talk about animal cells. Okay, animal cells are what we as humans are made of. Okay, we're not made of plant cells. No matter how bad you want to say that you're dandelion or whatever, not the case. We're made up of animal cells, and this picture right here is an example of what an animal cell might look like. Again, we said animal cells tend to be circular. That's not always the case. They don't always have a consistent structure, but ideally, we're just going to go ahead and we're gonna say they're circular. And then on this picture, we have multiple organelles, which we won't cover every single one of these, but we'll cover a good amount of them. And remember, organelles are the different parts inside of a cell. All right, so a cell is made up of organelles. Organelles are not made up of cells. Cells are made up of organelles. All right, and organelles are the different parts inside of a cell that have different jobs and different responsibilities in order to keep that cell functioning, keep that cell processing at a high level. Some of the organelles that we've talked about in class I have listed right over here, and we're going to talk about them as we go on. So first organelle is the nucleus. Remember in class we talked about the nucleus is sort of the control center of the cell. It's the boss of the cell. It tells the organelles what to do. It's basically the Mr. Ronin of the cell, right? We made that connection in class. Whereas if I'm the nucleus of the class, meaning I'm in charge of telling what responsibilities each of you have, that would mean all of you would be different organelles. Okay, so remember, a nucleus is an example of an organelle, but the different organelles you guys would be like the mitochondria, the vacuoles, the ribosomes, plasma or cell membrane. Those would be represented by you all because you have to listen to the nucleus. You have to listen to Mr. Ronin. Alrighty. And within the nucleus is chromosomes. Let's see, it looks like, I guess this isn't the greatest picture. So remember, chromosomes will kind of just look like little X's. Little X's or little Y's. And what's those chromosomes are made of are DNA strands. And what the DNA does is it tells us, or it rather has all of our genetic information. So our eye color, hair color, how tall we are, how strong we are naturally, how naturally strong we are. Of course, we can change that by lifting weights, but maybe how fast you are, just certain traits that make you who you are, certain characteristics that make you who you are. That information is contained by your DNA, which is an acronym for deoxyribonucleic acid, but we'll stick with DNA. That's a tough word. Yeah, that's basically what I need you to know about the nucleus, just that it's the boss of the cell and it contains DNA. The mitochondria is the next organelle we're going to talk about. And in class, we talked about the mitochondria. If we find it right here, find my mouse, kind of has a like an oval-like shape or rectangle-like shape. Some of you made the connection that it kind of looks like a hot dog, and that works out perfectly because hot dogs are food, and what the mitochondria will do is it'll turn food, such as hot dogs, into fuel or energy, right? Because obviously things need food or energy in order to survive. If we didn't eat for 3 days, our cells would have no way of getting any energy, all right? And we'd be very tired and probably pretty lazy. So after about 3 weeks of no food, I mean, it might be even shorter than that, but if we go long enough without food, you'll eventually die. Your cells won't be able to function because they're not getting any energy to do their jobs. So the mitochondria is incredibly important, okay? So what I want you to remember is that the mitochondria turns food into fuel. The vacuoles, this is interesting. So the vacuoles, I want you to make the connection that vacuoles, it kind of sounds like vacuum. What vacuums do is they, you use a vacuum to pick up garbage. And vacuums have, they have this little compartment inside of them which will eventually store the garbage that the vacuum picked up. What vacuoles will do is they'll store various things. The one thing I want us to remember is that vacuoles are going to store water. That's the one thing I want us to key in on here, and that's, I don't see vacuoles here on this map or on this diagram. I'm sorry about that, but not a big deal. Just remember that vacuoles will store water, among other things. Next up, we have ribosomes. Ribosomes are actually on this diagram. They can be represented by little dots. Not that crazy, not that spectacular. But what ribosomes do is they help your body. Well, they help your cells make protein. They'll make protein for your cells. And what I want you to look at is, if you look at the first 3 letters in ribosomes, it's rib. And I want you to, normally after I work out, maybe I'll play basketball, maybe I'll go for a run, maybe I'll lift weights, do push-ups, whatever. I want meat. And ribs are one of my favorite kinds of meat. For some reason, every time I work out, every time I get tired, I am craving something like ribs. And that's because after I work out, my cells are getting broken down. That's why after a tough workout, you might notice that your muscles are sore. You can't really stretch out that much because your muscles are they're so sore and tight. And the reason that is because when you work out, you're actually damaging your muscles and you're damaging the cells that make up those muscles. So that's why sometimes after people work out, they'll have a lot of protein. And what protein does is protein repairs damaged cells and damaged muscles. That's why ribosomes are so important, because they help your body produce proteins and sort those proteins out. So that's what I want you to remember is that ribosomes help make proteins, and those proteins in turn will help your muscles and help your cells recover, and it'll help repair any damage done to your cells and any damage done to your muscles. Okay, since we're talking about proteins, we're gonna go ahead and skip from the ribosomes. We're gonna jump down to the Golgi apparatus. And what the Golgi apparatus is it's like this post office. And the reason I say that is because the Golgi apparatus will receive materials such as proteins that the ribosomes will produce. It will take a look at those proteins. It'll make sure that those proteins are perfect, make sure those proteins are effective, and that they're ready to do their job. And what that Golgi apparatus will do is it'll just send those proteins to the endoplasmic reticulum. And we'll get to that in a second. But the reason I'm making this connection between Golgi apparatus and the post office is because that's kind of what a post office is. They get mail, and then they inspect the mail, and then they send it off to someone else. That's what the Golgi apparatus does, is it receives proteins, inspects those proteins, and then if those proteins are going to be effective, the Golgi apparatus will distribute those proteins to the endoplasmic reticulum. And the endoplasmic reticulum is just like a highway for proteins to travel along. We can see it right here. Kind of looks like a pile of pancakes. And what this does is it just makes a road for these proteins to travel along. The reason, well, I guess we'll get to that in a second, but we can kind of make the connection back to the circulatory system about how blood traveled through blood vessels. Okay? Blood wasn't just traveling at random places through random things. No, it was traveling through blood vessels. Same thing with proteins. They don't travel through any random thing or randomly around the cell. They'll travel through the endoplasmic reticulum, and the endoplasmic reticulum will take them to the places where they need to be. The cytoplasm, jumping back up here, it's not going to be labeled on this graph, but I guess it is. But the cytoplasm, notice how it's pointing to just a blank space, this blank yellow space. That's because the cytoplasm is the liquid part of the cell, kind of like with our blood. The liquid part of our blood was plasma, and what plasma was so important, the reason plasma was so important was because it helped certain, if it weren't for the plasma, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets wouldn't be able to travel throughout the blood vessel. Cytoplasm, kind of the same way, except the cytoplasm is a liquidy gel type thing, and what that is, it basically just provides the organelles with something to hang out in, so they're not always banging into each other and clumping into each other. It's just the liquid part of our cell. Okay? Plasma and cell membrane, that's just going to be the barrier of this animal cell. So what's going to happen is this animal cell will allow this plasma membrane rather, can be represented by this black line going around. And what this is going to do is it will allow certain things to come into the cell, such as nutrients or oxygen or water, things like that. And it's going to allow some things to exit out of it, such as carbon dioxide and waste and things like that. Remember, as you know, some things cannot enter into the animal cell, and that's because the plasma membrane will not let it. So the plasma membrane basically just serves as a barrier, and kind of like in our classroom, how I have tape lined up. I do not want you to cross that line of tape. That is my plasma membrane. You are not allowed to cross that plasma membrane unless I tell you, you know what, you are going to be a nutrient. You are allowed to cross my plasma membrane. So that's a connection we can make in class. That's a connection we can make to class. That's what I got for you. The plasma membrane is just a barrier. Allows some things to enter in, some things to not enter in. All right. Now we're going to talk about plant cells. Plant cells will have most of the same organelles that animal cells have, but there are a few things that make them different, and we'll talk about that right now. So the different things, well, let's first look at the shape of this plant cell. If we go back to our animal cell, we had a round structure, or a round shape. It doesn't really have that much structure. It's just kind of tends to be round. Plant cells, however, are rectangular, have a rectangular shape, and the reason they're rectangular is because of the cell wall. What the cell wall does is it gives plant cells their structure. You might say, Mr. Ronan, why don't Why don't animal cells have cell walls? Well, that's because we as humans, we have a skeleton and bones. And what the skeleton does and what our bones do is they give our body structure. If we didn't have a skeleton, we would just be like a puddle of blob. We wouldn't be able to stand up. We would just be a puddle of mush. Okay, but we have skeletons to help hold us up. Same deal with plants, except plants don't have a skeleton like we do. All right, so a tree, for example, isn't made up of bones. So the reason a tree is able to stand up straight and upright is because it has a cell wall, which helps give plants their structure, allows them to be upright without having a skeleton and bones and things like that. So that's what a cell wall is. A cell wall will give plants their structure, whereas we as humans, our skeletons give us our structure. And chlorophyll, more like borophyll. I love this. I love this clip. Anyways, chlorophyll. What chlorophyll does is it's super important. It's a super important part of plant cells, which allows photosynthesis to occur. And remember, photosynthesis is when plants use sunlight to produce energy for them, okay? So that's why plants, they need sunlight. I know there are some plants we talked about in class that might actually be able to survive without sunlight, and that's just great. But most plants need sunlight to survive. Otherwise, they'll die, they'll fade, they'll wither. They need sunlight to live. That's because the cells cannot get energy unless they get energy from the sun. And what the chlorophyll does is chlorophyll will allow the cell or the plant cell to turn sunlight into energy. Okay, and those are the two key differences between plant cells and animal cells. And over here we have a nice little diagram. Some of these look familiar. When we go back to, they look familiar because we just talked about a lot of them. With animal cells, there are a few key differences, and the two key ones that I want you to remember would be the cell wall and chlorophyll, which will be contained in the chloroplast. So it's basically right here. All right, let me see. I think that's my last slide. It is my last slide. All right, I think I made this video nice and quick. Hopefully, I'm going to hit end, and it's going to tell me it's like a 25-minute video. I guarantee it. But time flew for me. Hope you guys thought this was productive. Hopefully, it was helpful. I know we started to talk a little bit when we got to talking about the nucleus. We started talking about DNA and chromosomes. I'll make another video talking about DNA and chromosomes and our sexual reproduction unit and how certain traits get passed on and things like that. But I want to make sure we get finished talking about Punnett squares before I make that video, because I'd like to make just one video for that. Expect that to be up by this weekend. Awesome. I hope this video was helpful. Please let me know in class if you have any questions or if things are still unclear. Great job to you for watching this video. And I'm going to go ahead and say, here is your exit question. Your exit question. If you made it to the end of this video and you have a answer to these questions, come see me at the end of class. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go ahead, please bear with me here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write these questions. What I want you to do is, on a separate sheet of paper, answer these questions. If you do that, I will give you a piece of candy. That'll be, we're going to go with 5 questions, okay? So the first question will be, what is contained inside the nucleus? So your answers will be written down on a separate sheet of paper. What is contained inside the nucleus? Number 2, what are 2 organelles that make plant cells different from animal cells? Okay, so I'm looking for 2 organelles. I'd also like to know, what is their purpose or function? Okay, another question that I have. What is an example of a prokaryote cell? Prokaryote cell. I want an example. I gave you one example when I talked about that slide. Okay. I want to know, why can animal cells get away with not having a cell wall? In other words, why is it not a big deal that we as humans don't have cell walls? Okay, what allows us to not have a cell wall? And last question. What questions do you still have? Okay, so if you come to me in class with these 5 questions filled out on a separate sheet of paper, I will give you a piece of candy of your choosing. Okay, this shows me that you watched the video, shows me that you learned from the video, and that you're thinking actively during the video. All right, I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys, and we'll see you in class.